welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We're so excited to have you here in today's conversation. We also appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us. We know that there are lots of choices that you can make in a day, and we're so thankful that you took an hour to be with us in this conversation that we're having about food and how it's connected to people and sustainability. Welcome to everybody who's just now joining us. My name is Becky Megas, she, her pronouns, and I am the founder and chief care connector for Women in Sustainability. Women in Sustainability is an inclusive social and environmental justice nonprofit that is dedicated to caring for the people that care for the planet through community, advocacy, resources, and education to create a sustainable and equitable future through the feminist viewpoint and leadership. Women in Sustainability strives to create a safe space for like-minded and diverse individuals to create purposeful connections and conversations. All are welcome in our community. I'm so excited to introduce my dear friend Kayla. Since the day that I think it was the day that I met Kayla, pretty much, I was like, oh my gosh, Kayla, I love what you do. I want to share it with the world because I think it is so amazing and so fabulous. And so excited that she is joining us today to share in this. And we worked on other events together as well. And her work is just really unique, and looking forward to you getting to learn about it and hear more about this and how she connects people and food and sustainability in the same space. But a little bit about Kayla first. After spending 7 years in Hollywood working as a freelance filmmaker, as well as for both global talent agency and major television studios, Kayla decided she wanted to take some time to experience the world rather than watch other people do it on the big and small screens. From May 2015 to May 2016, she traveled through Asia, Europe, and South America. Traveling gave her a passion for creating experiences and an insatiable desire to experience new cultures and connect with people. So she founded The Same Plate, a company that creates curated cultural food experiences for those interested in exploring their local cities through food and getting inspired by the vibrancy present in cultural diversity. Help me give a warm Women in Sustainability welcome to Kayla Ferguson.
Oh. Thank you, Becky. Yeah, that was a great summary, and I'll kind of touch back on some of those points as I talk about how this whole initiative got started and how it kind of brings in all the pillars of food and connection and sustainability and all of that. So thank you all for joining on this Wednesday before the holiday. I know my brain is a little bit already relaxing after this webinar, so I appreciate your guys' time and attention. And I guess in the spirit of this webinar, I would love to just ask one more question. I know Becky asked about plans for yesterday, but out of curiosity of where people's taste buds have been, if that's the right way to say it, is what is the most adventurous and or memorable meal you've eaten, or if you haven't been super adventurous in your culinary life, what's something that you'd be really interested in trying? Any of those things. You can either unmute and say it or put it in the chat. I'm just curious kind of where people's interests lie. Huevos de hormigas. Oh, thank you, Becky. For some reason, I always open everything like, what's your favorite thing to eat? It's a great question.
That's not my favorite thing to eat, but it was the most adventurous thing that I ever ate.
And where did you have it at?
In Mexico.
Mexico. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And did you enjoy it?
You know, I was surprised. It kind of just didn't have a taste, but they're ant eggs, so they're teeny tiny and they're just kind of salty.
Interesting. I've actually never had those. Although who knows, those could be coming our way. I've been hearing all sorts of stuff about, insects as our next protein source, just because of how less environmentally intensive they are than cattle and all the other things we eat right now. So who knows, maybe in 20 years, we'll all just be eating insect burgers and it'll just be the normal thing. I don't know. So, anyone else, the most interesting thing you've eaten or something that you just want to try that you haven't yet, a type of cuisine that you've heard about and haven't necessarily given it a shot yet?
I'm not an adventurous eater, but I'll try pretty much anything once.
Yeah.
I won't say no, but I may not take a second bite.
I appreciate that because I'm the same way, and I think the permission to love it or hate it is part of the experience. And I did when I was in Israel, actually, for the last meal when I was in Israel, we went to a restaurant that had lots of things that, we don't necessarily eat as normal practice here, like liver, heart, all those internal organs that are very common in other places, but not as much so here. And there was some ox testicles on the menu. And I was like, well, this is my last night in Israel. I'm going to give it a shot. And that is one that I will never try again. And I am pretty sure I will never grow to like that. So, and yes, frog legs. I have not tried those either yet, but that would be kind of interesting. I imagine them being kind of like maybe a little crispy. I'm not sure. I guess it depends on how you cook them, but cool. Well, if anything else comes to mind, you can feel free to put it in the chat as we're talking. And I guess just kind of to circle back to the introduction that Becky gave, I always like to start with a little bit of how this whole endeavor got started. And yes, Rocky Mountain oysters, really quickly, Becky, I did try those. My dad tricked me one time saying, you should try these Rocky Mountain oysters. And now I'm allergic to shellfish. Back then I wasn't. And I was like, ooh, oysters sound good. And I tried one, and then my dad couldn't stop laughing, and I figured out what he was laughing about. So yes, I have. I was tricked. So, but yeah, I'll like I said, I'll go back to kind of how this whole thing got started. I guess it begins in some ways in my childhood. I always grew up with a lot of, I guess, ceremony around food, not in like a really formal way, but we would consistently have friend gatherings, family gatherings, and there was always food present. So I grew up just knowing that if food was there and that people were there, and it meant there was going to be, probably a fun time to be had. And so that's I guess where the whole thing really got started. But I'll fast forward to the beginning of the introduction that Becky gave me. I grew up here in Denver. I do really, really love this city and think it has a ton to offer, sometimes even more than what people recognize it for. There's way more than just breweries and weed here, in my opinion. But I did go out to California for school back in 2008 when I finished high school, and I went to Pepperdine and I studied film. Well, actually I was studying journalism, and then I drank the Los Angeles Kool-Aid and got a film degree, because I guess that's what happens when you're impressionable late teens and early 20s. So I ended up with a film degree and stayed out in Hollywood for a while, and for a little bit of time was convinced I was going to become, some sort of executive at Warner Brothers or Netflix or whatever it might be. I was doing freelance film production, which was really, really fun, shooting some commercials, some independent music videos, some B-level, C-level movies with Haley Duff actually was in one of them. So that was kind of a cool claim to fame. But that wasn't paying me any money. So I ended up working at a talent agency, William Morris Endeavor, if anyone is familiar with the entertainment industry. If not, you might have never heard of it. But it's essentially one of the largest talent agencies in the world. All of the writers, actors, directors, producers, they don't do their own business deals. They have agents that broker them for them. And all of the agents have assistants that do all of the grunt work and kind of get yelled at like Devil Wears Prada style type of job. I thought that was kind of a joke until I went and worked in that industry and realized it's actually quite real. And decided that was not going to be a place that I was going to thrive long term. So I did a couple of years at the talent agency. I spent a little bit of time also at Legendary Film Studios, helping my boss at the time open up their television division. But ultimately, kind of decided it wasn't going to be a long-term fit for me. It was way too stressful. It didn't really match my personality. I'm not someone who thrives on fear or like, I don't do a good job when people are scaring me into doing a good job. So it wasn't going to be a long-term thing. I didn't know where to go though, and wasn't sure what to do. My degree and all my experience was in film, and I had kind of like this fishbowl around me of Hollywood and couldn't see outside of what was immediately around me. And it was actually, I think, one of the meanest agents at William Morris Endeavor at the time for forcing me onto this journey in a way. He was the kind of guy that would throw his keyboard against the wall and smash computer screens and yell at his assistants. And he was doing that one day during lunch about a chicken sandwich that his assistant had gotten him that didn't look like it looked like online. And of course, that was a great reason to throw a temper tantrum. It was my lunch break as well. We all took the same lunch break. And I was on Facebook and I saw a friend who had just posted pictures from a trip to Turkey. And somehow him yelling about this chicken sandwich and seeing her pictures of Turkey was like a light bulb moment for me where I said, that's what I have to do to figure out what I want to do next, is I just need to go travel the world, essentially. Which sounds kind of crazy that a chicken sandwich sent me on a around the world journey, but it did. And I after that time, I said, okay, in 6 months, I'm going to be out of here, and I'm gonna start in Japan. And so I spent 6 months selling everything, saving up as much money as I could, which ended up being about $6,000, which is, as we all know, doesn't really go very far. But I was quite proud of myself for saving $6,000, because they were paying me $10 an hour, and I was living in Los Angeles, which is not a cheap city. So saving up $6,000, I was quite proud of myself. I bought a ticket to Japan, and then decided I was just going to go for a year and see what happens. So in May 2015, I took off to Tokyo, having never been to Asia. Japan was definitely an ambitious place to start once I got there, realizing, some of the language barriers that exist, how I couldn't even pretend to make out any of the words because none of the characters are the same as the English alphabet. But I instantly, just fell in love with traveling. I met people at the first hostel that I stayed at that became almost instant friends. I still have seen them recently to this day. They live up in Canada. So I guess it's been a couple of years since COVID, but I did Japan, and then I went to Thailand, where I actually stayed for about 3 months and worked at a dive shop and got my dive master certification. And it was there when I was in Thailand that I became really passionate about specifically sustainability and travel, because I was on an island down in the southern part of Thailand, and it's a very, very popular tourist destination. And as a result, there's huge amounts of plastic that line the beaches because people can't drink the water there when they're traveling from Europe. There is kind of like a party island on one side of it. So every morning when I would go running, I would see the locals picking up garbage from the parties the night before. And I just thought that was something didn't sit well with me there. I'm like, why do we come to this beautiful island and then we trash it and just expect the locals to pick up after us? That did not sit well with me. Being a dive master and going underwater all the time and seeing the coral reefs, and then also seeing how much seafood was on the menu and wondering, how much of that was being sourced sustainably, how much damage were we doing to the ocean just to feed people here on this island, myself included. Like, I was not necessarily removed from the impact that humans have on this island, but I became really, really passionate about sustainable travel, and even thinking about the carbon footprint of my plane flight from Thailand and then over to India. And that kind of really started to grow as I went to Europe. I came back to the US after being in India, then heading over to South America, and then coming back to the States. And I really developed a strong interest in sustainable travel, and tried to figure out, how can I still travel and do the things that I love and not necessarily have the guilt around it, like knowing that there's a lot of carbon that's put in the air when you fly on a plane, and that I sometimes have to drink out of plastic water bottles when I'm in a place where I can't drink the water. And how do you kind of start to reconcile these things and be able to enjoy and be a responsible person? I was really curious about all of that at the same time that I got back to the United States and was trying to still figure out what to do. Amazingly, 26 countries in a year's worth of traveling didn't necessarily create this like amazing idea of what I was going to do next with my life. I just wanted to keep traveling, but didn't have the resources to do it. So I came back to Denver. I started doing a couple of miscellaneous, I was leading tours around Denver. So if you ever want a walking tour of Denver, I can point you to a cool place to learn more about the city. I was working at a coffee shop. I ultimately then got a full-time job doing corporate event planning, which was pretty fun, but it was the same as Hollywood in the sense that we were stressing about manufactured problems. We were yelling about, at night, my boss would email me at 11 o'clock, like, oh, what about these napkins? I'm like, I don't care about the napkins. They're just going to go in the garbage. Like, why are we stressing about this? And so I was really unhappy still professionally. And I happened to be sitting at a restaurant, an Indian restaurant in Arvada with my partner at the time, complaining a lot about how I didn't want to be here. I didn't want to be working. I just wanted to be traveling. And why do we have to sit and do a 9-to-5 job? And this is just the worst. And that was yet another light bulb moment, kind of like when the agent was yelling at his assistant about a chicken sandwich. I was like, it's not the same. Sitting here in this Indian restaurant isn't the same as being in India, of course, because we're not in India, but you can capture some of the feeling of traveling through food and sitting with people right here in our own backyard through like culinary events, if you will. And I got to thinking of, when I went to Thailand, when I went to India, whenever I showed up in a new country, the first thing I would do would usually be to get a meal because I was hungry. And usually food was the first way that I would kind of introduce myself to a new culture. This is now I'm eating Indian food instead of eating Thai food. And usually because I was staying in hostels, because that was the only thing I could afford on my $6,000 budget, there'd be other people there too who were also hungry at mealtime like I was. And so they became almost instant new friends, going to whatever cheap food stall we could find or cheap local restaurant and just getting to know people over food, some of whom I had maybe a lot in common with if they were from the US, some people who I had very little in common with and that I almost had a hard time communicating with because of the language barrier. But no matter what, we could sit there and enjoy a meal together as new friends. And I was like, that was some of the highlights when I think back of traveling, of meeting people over food and all the different things I got to try. And I said, I could create that here in Denver to an extent through cultural food events. And so I decided I was going to invite everyone to an Ethiopian meal and just post on Facebook that, hey, I'm going to this Ethiopian restaurant. Come if you wanna. This is the day and time that we're doing it. And if no one showed up, well, then I would enjoy an Ethiopian meal by myself, and it was fine. I think maybe like 10 people or so showed up, and then I, moved on to Polish food. I did Greek food, Peruvian food. There was a whole list of them. And by the third or fourth month that I was putting this together, I had 30 or so people coming to these events. So I realized there was a really big interest in people trying new cultures, meeting new people. And all I had to do was just to remove the barrier of, lack of knowledge about where do you find this sort of food, which I loved researching that sort of thing. So it was easy. So that's how the whole thing kind of got started. I turned it into a little bit more of a formal enterprise, if you will, just because when I had 30 people show up to the Greek restaurant and, want to eat, the restaurant was like, thanks so much. We're so happy so many people are here, but we need to be able to plan if 30 people are going to show up at once, which makes total sense. So I started kind of creating tickets and just so I could get a head count, really that kind of just covered the cost of the meal. So I knew how many people were coming, and then I could let the restaurant owner, chef know, 15 people are coming, and I would love to have a whole selection of Greek food, if you will, and have you tell us a little bit about it. Where did it come from? All that sort of thing. And so that's how the whole Same Plate got started. And in the background, there was always that sustainability component, sustainability of travel. And then even more as I got more involved here with, my own garden in Denver and just understanding our food systems, because food is such a nourishing part of life, how much when we connect with each other over food, how much we also if we allow ourselves and if we create that intentionality, connect with the food that we're eating together, and how much I think that connects us then to the planet, and how we couldn't do these events. We couldn't sit around food. We couldn't have even the meals we're going to have tomorrow for Thanksgiving if we don't have a planet that can sustain us, and if we don't have farming practices that can give us nutrient dense food, that's all tied together. And without one, we can't have the other. And so I've become very, very passionate about our farming systems, how it's nourishing us, and also how different places around the world have different ways in which they, there's different food that they farm in Thailand than we do here. And I just think also that's a very cool cultural understanding of where food comes from, what the agricultural practices are. And that's almost like a side conversation. But all of this came together to put these events on that connect us to each other, connect us to the food, and connect us to the land that then gives us the food it's kind of like a circle that can go in either direction, the way that I look at it for these events. So that's kind of how the whole Same Plate got started. I'm curious here if anyone on this call specifically is involved really in, agriculture or food sustainability or food access or anything like that. And if you are, you can raise your hand. And if not, no worries. I'm just curious. No? Cool. Well, I was gonna actually ask if anyone was involved in that, because the other, Becky, I think we were gonna maybe plug this at the beginning. With the holiday coming up, I think this is a really important time to acknowledge how fortunate we are to have the food and the opportunity that we have, and also how much food waste happens this time of year and how many people are hungry this time of year, that might be year round, but this time is especially difficult when, there's kind of so much celebration around food. And so as we go into the holiday, we were gonna, I don't know if anyone here, most people on this call are probably familiar with We Don't Waste, which is an organization here in Denver. And Becky, I don't want to actually speak to them incorrectly. Do you want to share a little bit more about We Don't Waste and what they do here in the city?
Yeah, I'm actually pulling up the link real fast. So let me pull that up. So We Don't Waste is one of our partner organizations with Women in Sustainability. They are a food rescue organization, and all of that food then goes to help those in need. So they work with big companies. They work with the Broncos Stadium, with the Coors Field, with a lot of grocery stores. They also have a partnership with HelloFresh, if you're familiar with HelloFresh. So a lot of stuff that HelloFresh can't actually give in time to their customers, all of that then is sent to We Don't Waste. For those that don't know, HelloFresh is actually based in Boulder, so they're a Colorado-based organization. But all this food then goes to the We Don't Waste warehouse, that's sorted, and then We Don't Waste has several mobile markets throughout the week. Every week, we actually just did one yesterday for Women's Sustainability. We had about 10 volunteers show up and we distributed to 177 families. And that was just one day. So really great organization that is helping to give back here in Denver and the surrounding area. And I know there's some people that are on the call, not necessarily in Colorado. Finding your local food bank. There's lots of local food banks that you can work with that will graciously take food. If you're not familiar, there is the Bill Emerson Act. The Bill Emerson Act was signed into law 1992. It was under Bill Clinton. But basically that act allows for people to be able to give and donate food in good faith, meaning that that food is not harmful. So you are following all catering laws, which for any food that is out in the open is 3 hours. If it's heated, if it's cold and it's a hot day, obviously an hour later, that's probably not going to be really great to give away, especially if it's dairy or, eggs or anything like that. But as long as you know that something you would eat, think of it something, would I put this in my mouth and consume this, and in good faith donate it to your local shelter to help feed those in need in your own communities. So definitely look into that, build relationship with these shelters. A lot of times they love when people are able to just come down and drop off food for those that need it. I'll also drop in the Bill Emerson Act. And if you have any questions on that, happy to answer any questions about that as well. Anything else to that, Kayla?
No, that was perfect. And that was kind of a good segue of where I figured we could kind of go with this conversation in the spirit of the holidays and the spirit of this time of year. A few other organizations that, I've kind of gotten involved with that to me bring together the idea of healthy food access, creating meals for people, and then kind of like the cultural exploration of food and the communities that are involved in them is Sun Valley Kitchen. For those of you who don't know, the Sun Valley neighborhood is right down there by Broncos Stadium, and they are kind of one of the lowest income and the most diverse communities in Denver. That might be changing a little bit with some of the new housing that they've put in there, but they have a really amazing kitchen that got started there when at one time I think it was a 7-Eleven, and then the 7-Eleven closed, and there was a local resident who realized that everyone was still walking to this corner looking for food. And it was like, well, what if, because people were just trained that with there's 7-Eleven, there's food, this is where we go. And they were like, what if people still came to the same location for food, but we had more than packaged chips or, the hot dogs that you can get or whatever. And so they created Sun Valley Kitchen, where they provide very low cost and oftentimes free meals to the community, many of which might be living in low income housing. They have cooking classes for kids so that kids can kind of learn some cooking techniques and take it back to their family. They do breakfast baskets this holiday season for Thanksgiving and Christmas that then they donate to the houses around there. So they're a really great organization that provides food and provides training and provides economic opportunity for the community there in Sun Valley. So I love them and think they're amazing and would plug them anywhere. Another one is Casa de Paz. For people who don't know that one, it's House of Peace Casa de Paz is Spanish, House of Peace in English. And it's a house that started out here in Aurora. I'm in Aurora, that's why I say out here, really near the ICE Detention Center, which is one of the largest in the country, unfortunately. The Aurora ICE Detention Center is huge. And I got to learning when I was reading about it that a lot of people are brought there from maybe the border, even other states. And once they get here, they don't even hardly know where they are sometimes. Our treatment of immigrants in the detention center is a whole nother conversation that I won't necessarily launch into right now. But Casa de Paz was started realizing that people would get released, not knowing hardly what city they're in, no phone, no money for bus tickets to get where they're trying to go. And so they started this place where people could come for 48 or so hours, get some clothes, get a shower, figure out where they're at. They had some like burner phones they gave them for just to get to where they needed to go. And one of the things that they offer is healthy meals. And one way they offer healthy meals is by having community members cook meals and bring them food. So I was doing that for a while before COVID, cooking a meal for anywhere from 6 to 8 people and just going and dropping it on the porch of the house. And that's another way to, even if you're not yourself involved in the meal, to create a shared meal amongst people who probably appreciate it more than we'll ever hear from, based on the time that they spent in the detention center before getting to the house. So that's another organization that I love to promote and pitch as it relates to food and culture and all that sort of thing. The other, I guess, idea that I have that I like to share with people around this time of year is around this idea of extra food. That we all have, come Saturday. Well, most of us, depending on what we like to eat for Thanksgiving, will probably have a bunch of extra turkey, a bunch of extra stuffing, a bunch of extra whatever. And there's, if you like to cook, which most people who have food on Thanksgiving have a little bit of an inkling towards cooking. I've started doing something where I take the extra food and find like a creative way to turn it into a dish I haven't tried before. So there's a company called Burlap and Barrel based in Colorado here. They have actually really, really great spices. They source the ingredients directly from Turkey, from Thailand, from all sorts of places. And they have really, really high quality spices. And I have a bunch in my cabinet and I don't exactly know what to cook with them sometimes. And I've started a game where I just pull out a spice and then I'm like, okay, what's something that I can cook with this spice this week? And I usually have to do some Googling and some learning of ingredients I haven't heard of before, but it's really fun. And this week I just happened to pull out a Turkish spice. And that when I Googled, one of the recipes that came up as a popular way to use this spice was turkey kebabs. So I'm going to take the extra turkey from our Thanksgiving, grind it up in some way. I'll have to go on Google and figure out how, and turn it into a Turkish turkey kebab and find a creative way to, use our food scraps as opposed to just getting sick of them and throwing them out, which I think more and more people are becoming conscious of not doing that. But we do still have a lot of food waste this time of year. So that's a fun way I've found to bring together different cultural food traditions, different types of food, and kind of fuse it into the traditions that we have now, and also really focus on not wasting all the food that we have left over this time of year. So there's just another fun idea for anyone who doesn't know what to do with their Thanksgiving leftovers, and you can apply the same thing to Christmas or really any time of year. And yeah, thanks for all those. Thank you for all those links. Those are all the ones that I would have put in the chat myself. So I know I've been talking kind of fast and kind of a lot, so I'll pause for a second and just kind of open up for any question and answer about anything I shared. Some of these organizations, I'm not necessarily the best expert on all of them. I'm just an enthusiast. So if I don't know the answer, I will just let you know I don't know the answer, but I'm happy to try and answer anything that I can.
Hey, Kayla, I know you and I have so many opportunities to talk about the work that you're doing, and I'm interested to know, when you host these dinners and you have these opportunities to go into the Ethiopian restaurants and the Greek and the Thai restaurants and actually have more cultural experiences, what are you and your guests taking away the most from those experiences?
That's a great question. And actually, as you asked that, it kind of made me think about how the name got started, the Same Plate name got started. And that kind of lends itself to what I hope people take away and what I try to create for people to take away from these experiences. So the very first meal that I did was Ethiopian. And at the time, I didn't necessarily know that it was going to fit so perfectly with the name of what did become the same plate, but it was, I guess, very fortuitous, if you will. And when I first started this, I actually had a goal to start a blog and tell people about these restaurants and almost kind of do free promotion for some of these restaurants. The Ethiopian restaurant that I went to, it's the oldest one in Denver. I think it started in 1982, and it's amazing and delicious. And it's literally two people, a husband and wife team, do everything. They open the restaurant, they do the dishes, they do the, they're your server, your waitress, the cooking, literally everything. It's a 2-person show. And so you can imagine that marketing themselves is not necessarily something that they have a lot of time or resources to do. And they have a lot of the Ethiopian community coming in there. They're kind of like the go-to place for a lot of the Ethiopian community there on Colfax, and more non-Ethiopian people have started going there. But I just think it's such a amazing restaurant and such an amazing, continued offering from these Ethiopian people who got here in 1982 that I just wanted to tell people about it. I just think it's so cool that these restaurants exist, and so many people don't know that these restaurants exist or the people behind them. So I started kind of wanting to do a blog, and that I haven't necessarily continued that in the way that I wanted to, but because I wanted to make a blog out of this whole thing, I went and sat down with the daughter of the restaurant owners, who was sharing with me what I just told you, how it got started, when her parents got here, that they do everything. And at the end of all the interviews that I did with some of these restaurants, I would always ask, what is something you would want people to take away about Ethiopian food or Ethiopian culture that they might, not otherwise know? And she said something that was just so perfect. I wish I could say the words exactly as she said them. But for those of you who don't know, Ethiopian food is a very, very communal meal. You get like the really squishy injera bread, and then they put all sorts of, really flavorful like lentils and eggs and all sorts of things on top of it. And everyone shares this same big bread in the center of the table. And so she said, I want people to know that our culture is just like our food. We're very welcoming, and we just want to share this with people. We want people to know about our food. We want people to know how much we want people here experiencing our food. And our culture is like us. We just love to eat from the same plate. And I was like, oh, well, that's perfect. And so that's how the name The Same Plate got started. And that kind of is the ethos of all the events that I try to plan. Like I want people, when they come to the events, to first of all, really learn something new about another culture. So I almost always try to, and I don't think I've ever done an event where I haven't had the chef or the restaurant owner come and introduce themselves, talk a little bit about how the restaurant got started, talk a little bit about the food that they're serving, some of which is more familiar to people than others. Like I just recently did a Colombian event, and that was a little bit more, I think some of that food is a little bit more familiar to us just because Colombia is closer to us than Ethiopia. But there were still some great things that she shared about her family and starting the restaurant and where the food comes from, that I think was, I like to think people really enjoyed learning about that. And then I also really want people to feel that sense of community when they're sitting there with other people, even if they were a stranger when you walked in the door, that you feel at least a little bit connected to them. Maybe they might not be your new best friend, but at least you feel like you connected with a new person that you wouldn't have otherwise met over a unique meal that you can hopefully remember. And that's what I want people to get out of it. I think food is an extremely disarming way to meet new people. Like you can be politically opposed to people. You can be opposed to people in almost every single way. But if you're sharing food over the same table, for some reason, to me, it just feels like there's less tension, to meet that new person, to learn something new. And so that's what I tried to create, is regardless of age, regardless of gender, regardless of anything, that everyone can connect with each other and enjoy a shared meal that, kind of takes them someplace else, maybe around the world for the evening. And so that's what I am always working to create. During COVID, I had to take a a good hiatus for these events, as you can imagine, because restaurants and events were certainly not something that people were anxious to take part in. But I've recently just started getting the monthly events back going again. We recently did Colombian, and come January, I'm planning another Ethiopian event. I kind of want to get back to that experience and kind of revisit that very first meal that we had in 2019. My cat's here to say hi. And then I'm going to be doing an Indonesian event actually in February. So details on that are going to be forthcoming. If you're interested in just knowing when they're planned and I guess tickets are available, you can, I'll put my email in the chat. You can just email me and I'll make sure to let you know when the events are ready. And when I say tickets, I usually, I try to make them pretty, what's the word? Affordable. Mostly I kind of just charge tickets to cover the cost of the food and you know, maybe a little bit of extra time for the chef. So it's I think a really economic way, if you will, to meet new people, try new food, and do something you're probably going to do otherwise. You know, everyone likes going out to eat every once in a while, and hopefully this will it could be a new experience for the way that you engage with that, even just once a month. So yeah, and then Becky also posted my Instagram. Thank you, Becky. And I always post ticket links and event announcements on Instagram as well. So
I will forewarn you, she also posts pictures of delicious food. So if you happen to catch her Instagram account while you're hungry, you're in trouble because it's delicious.
Thank you, Becky. I am trying to up my food photography game. So I'm glad to know that it makes you feel hungry when you see those pictures.
You entice me, that's for sure. For maybe people who aren't necessarily in Denver, who can't, you know, go to the same place, or if somebody watches this video down the road, for people who may be nervous about trying something new, if they're not sure about walking into an Ethiopian restaurant, what to expect, what are some tips or advice that you would give to people who may be wanting to get out and experience it, but not sure how to take that first step?
Yeah, that's a really great question, because when I first started doing these events, that's the first thing people said to me. They were like, you know, I guess I kind of always wanted to try this, but I just didn't know how. Like, I didn't know what to ask for. I didn't even know where to start looking. I didn't know which restaurant was good. And so then I realized that really all I was doing was just removing a barrier to access, you know, just saying, hey, this is what you can do. And I just do a little bit of the research to learn about the food, to talk to the restaurant chef. And then I just invite people to come. So if you're not in Denver and you can't join events, but you do want to go try something out, the first thing I would say is find a friend. You know, I feel like it's way easier to go try something new when you have another individual with you. And that definitely like adds to the kind of my belief that meals shared are just, you know, one of the magic pieces of life, in my opinion. As a side note, I think loneliness and fast food are things that we can see grow together, because I think we get so much connection and value out of sharing a meal with each other. So the first thing I would say is find a friend who might be like, ooh, that sounds kind of interesting to try. And then the second part that might feel like a little bit outside of a comfort zone is to just, I've never gone into a restaurant and said, I am new here and I don't know what to eat. Can you please advise me? And had it be ill received. Usually I find that they're just like more than excited to be like, oh my gosh, this is the best thing on the menu. I'm so, just like the Ethiopian restaurant, they were beyond excited to just share their culture with people and share their food and share their knowledge, and just wanting to learn really opens people up to sharing with you. And so the only time maybe that I've met a little bit of a barrier is if there was some sort of like language thing where I was like trying to ask a question and maybe they couldn't understand my question, or vice versa. But you can still get around that. You can just kind of, you know, say like, where this is what I'm thinking. You can point to things on the menu, and, you know, facial expressions. There's lots of ways that we communicate outside of words. And so in some ways, I think it's also just a great exercise in moving a little bit outside of your comfort zone and seeing what happens. And I know that's not necessarily here's like the silver bullet to make it a seamless, perfect experience, but it's same with like when you're traveling to anywhere outside of where you're used to. Some of the fun and some of the memory comes from when you kind of, you know, stumble along. And at the time you're like, oh my gosh, I have no idea what I'm doing. But then when you look back on it, you're like, oh man, I really remember that experience and I really learned so much from it. And I think you can take that same mindset into just trying out a restaurant that you've never tried before in your own city. So that's my non-advice advice. Is that the way to say it?
I thought it was great advice. And I'll add to that, like whenever you travel, I think it's important for when my partner and I travel, we always ask the locals for tips on the local restaurant instead of finding the chains, because they're going to give you that back corner alley restaurant that is going to give you authentic food. So that is always something we like to do as well. Want to open up to any questions. I can ask questions all day. I can have conversations all day with Kayla. So want to open it up. Does anybody have some questions that they want to ask Kayla about, food and connecting to food and sustainability while we have her expertise here? Feel free to unmute and ask a question, or go ahead and pop it in the chat and I'm happy to ask for you, whatever is easiest for you.
I was wondering if I was going to ask that, Natalia, what's your favorite type of food? It really can kind of depend on my mood for sure. I don't know if I have a consistent favorite. I really love Mexican food, which I know maybe because we have so much Mexican food here in the United States, people are like, oh, that's not that inventive, but I love good Mexican food. I also will frequently find myself going towards Vietnamese food and kind of like their soups and pho and that sort of thing. I just find it so, especially now during the winter, it's just so warming and nice. I love Thai food. I love Thai curry, and that might just be because I had such a fond experience of working at a dive shop in Thailand. And so part of it, because so much of food too for me is associated to the memories with it, and there might be food I tell you I don't like, and it's not that I don't like the food, it's that I had a bad experience maybe at the restaurant that I was eating it at or something. And then I also, my go-tos would be Greek food, and then I really like Japanese food, and especially trying to figure out how to cook Japanese food at home I find to be a fun adventure. So, and yes, I also lived in Mexico, so there's some good food down there. So I don't know, it depends on the day, but I could be, there's very few foods I don't like, to be honest with you.
I'm really regretting not eating lunch right now. I'm just gonna where did you live in Mexico?
I was just in the Playa del Carmen area, just about an hour south of Cancun. So it was great. And actually I was there with Felipe, who's on this call right now. He was down there in Mexico with me. And we had a really good time. We're looking at other places in Mexico that we want to go, maybe like Oaxaca. From a food standpoint, Oaxaca, I think, is kind of like, they call it the motherland of Mexican cuisine. So I want to go check that out and see what other stuff is there. Because that was the other thing that was amazing to me, and is when we think of Mexican food, we think just Mexican food, but it's like thinking even food in the South, maybe Mississippi, can be very different than what people might gravitate towards up in, Boston or New York. And same with Colorado has different food trends than maybe parts of Texas, and Mexico is the same. Like Oaxaca has some different food than other different places, and same with India, like northern Indian food and southern Indian food actually have some very notable differences. So that's the other fun thing too, is even within a certain region, there's still so much to explore. And we can do that even here with our own. I was recently in New Orleans and had some Cajun food, which is not necessarily something that is a standard thing to eat here in Denver. So even traveling domestically, there's a way to explore other cultures through food. And I just think that's so fun and cool.
I appreciate.
Yes. And yeah, Felipe, you forgot to mention chili, my favorite. That is correct. That is
he's calling you out here.
What'd you say, Kara?
You're on mute.
I said, oh my God, because it's so good. I still fantasize about the chilaquiles that I had in some unknown town we drove through in Mexico, and I fantasize about finding it again.
Yeah, if you do, please tell me what town that was in Mexico, and we'll go give it a try. In the meantime, you can work on making it yourself. So,
a little bit. What other questions? Anybody else have any other questions that they want to ask Kayla?
Gonna show one last thing here before we go. Sorry, I should have had this ready on my desk. This is another thing that, and Becky, I think I haven't emailed you back yet, but we can put this in maybe the follow-up email. I've also created a way that, can make it easier for people to explore their food if they don't know where to begin, I've created a little food passport if anyone wants it. And this one's somewhat specific to Denver, just in the sense that I have distance from Denver, like for Japan. So if you were in the Pacific Northwest, those distances wouldn't be accurate, but you could still very much use this passport and try Japanese food. I have Thai food, South Korean food, and then little places and little stickers where you can mark off once you went there, and a place that you can make notes about what you ate and what you liked. And so if anyone's interested in one of these little food passports, just to get your culinary creativity going, you can also email me at that same email I already shared, and I'd be happy to get you one of these and the stickers to go with it. So
they're super fun. We did them for a dinner that we had, which was in the spring. It feels like,
yeah, gosh, where does the time go, right?
Yeah. I was like, that was this year, right? It was definitely this year.
Yes.
But we made them for our dinner that we had in the spring, which was really cool. They were a big hit.
Yeah.
Kara Jean, do you have a question?
Well, a lot of this sounds like dinner stuff, but we brought up the chilaquiles for breakfast. Do you have like meal specific suggestions? Like if somebody wanted to be doing a brunch circuit, could you be like, oh,
that, right here, right now, off the top of my, you mean like for Mexican food, or is there a specific type of food? Just anything. I don't know if I don't necessarily have it collected and written down. I would be more than happy to brainstorm with someone about that though. Like what does even like a Greek brunch look like? Or what does a Japanese brunch look like, as opposed to, because I think, a lot of times we'll think just dinner but I think it would be really fun to, put on like a Thai, what is a Thai brunch, or even just like flavors of Thai into a brunch. I think that could be really, really fun. So now you have me inspired to start thinking about that.
I would like that. Are you still doing anything with romaine recipes?
I have this food passport, and I am figuring out kind of my next steps with that, in terms of having kind of the recipes and the passports and the meals as an offering for people. I'm just figuring out exactly how I'm going to, I guess, roll that out formally. So stay tuned on that.
Stay tuned. Any other questions? I'm curious to know, Kayla, so, thinking about you live in Denver, right? And you mentioned Mexican restaurants, and we have tons of them, right? Mm-hmm. How do you go about finding restaurants that are authentic? Because we have lots of people who are just creating restaurants who aren't necessarily, people who are local to the tradition. So how do you find authentic?
Yeah, it does take sometimes a little bit of research, because there are, sometimes a lot of people or a lot of restaurants that are around, and I'm not saying anything bad about those restaurants, but I really do like to try and find ones for my events that are, like the Ethiopian restaurant. It was started by Ethiopian immigrants, and they ran it. And it was like, there was also a story for them to tell about how, they started the restaurant here in Denver. And so it does sometimes take a little bit of research, and sometimes just looking at, online websites or whatever Facebook pages is not necessarily the easiest, but it doesn't always say, right? Like how do we get started? Some are really great and be like, we started this family restaurant in 1970 when we got here from wherever. And I'm like, oh, great. How easy that it's just on your website. But a lot of times I honestly use Instagram. A lot of these restaurants are on Instagram, and I find them easier to contact on Instagram than via email. And I'll just outreach to them and say, hey, I put on these events. I like to let people know about some of these local restaurants and tell the stories of these local restaurants. Is this something you'd be interested in? And then usually once I get a response there, then I, can start a conversation and see what an event would look like. And I'm not necessarily going to say I'm the expert in determining authenticity, because I'm not necessarily a Mexican chef. I'm not a Honduran chef. I'm not any of those sort of things. But usually when talking to the people behind the Instagram page or whatever, I can start to get a feel for, what type of establishment they are, how easy it would be to share them and their food with a group of people coming in. And so I just kind of do a little bit of legwork that way. And sometimes I really rely on like Yelp reviews. I found the Indonesian restaurant by just scouring a bunch of reviews and having people say, we were visiting from Indonesia and really wanted some Indonesian food, and this is the place we found, and this is where we'll always go back to. So I'm like, okay, there's like a local expert that has validated this place, so I'm going to take their word over anything else that I could possibly find. And so it's just kind of a lot of uncovering of stones of like, oh, could this be it? Could this be it? So it's a little bit of a process, but I don't mind taking on that process and then sharing that information with people, because I realize that sometimes just is the barrier. Other people don't have the time or interest to look. And so if I do, and then I can just tell people, hey, this is the best Indonesian restaurant, I'm more than happy to be that person. So
yeah, I love that. I love that. You are going to be my go-to for all restaurants moving forward. Be prepared. There is another question from Cara Jean. Do you encourage any specific conversations during the meals about culture or the food?
Yeah, I definitely do try to. I try to like strike this balance of, open and casual conversation and some kind of a little bit of direction for people to take, especially if a lot of people at the event maybe don't know each other. And I usually am able to kick it off kind of with the chef themselves coming out and sharing about the restaurant, about themselves, about the food. And then in the past, I've had some question cards that kind of that just are prompting questions if people feel like they need them, that kind of center around the specific food that we're eating, or more general travel type of questions and food type of questions, just to kind of get people thinking in that direction. And I don't necessarily make it a requirement that now we're going to go around the table and everyone's going to answer this question, because that feels a little bit too like stuffy and formal. But I do try to create, an avenue of conversation to go down that aligns with the goals of the event and the type of food that we're eating. So
yeah, so important. When I send out the follow-up, I'm actually going to send out some information. So we also did a dinner with Women in Sustainability in September. It was our farm to table dinner, and we had the conversation based on global food and the connection with global food and local food, and how that connects again to people and climate. And our speaker for that event has some really amazing words. And so I'm going to I have her script. And so I'm actually going to send over some of that as well to kind of to continue that connection, because I think she says some really valuable things. So watch for that. Food has been really important to women in sustainability. I personally think that if we can fix our food problems, we fix probably 95% of the world's problems. I think a lot of our problems stem from food. So I love what Kayla is doing. We're going to continue the conversation into next year around food. We're going to continue to do some sort of farm to table dinner with women's sustainability, because again, I think that's a really important conversation. Dumb and mean. Yeah. It's just, there's so many, when you start to realize all the problems, you're like, oh, like we could fix this with food. So anyways, I'm so glad that Kayla could share today about hoping to connect around food and different cultures and learning about sustainability through that. I have a last question. It's always a question that we always ask all of our speakers at Women in Sustainability. And looking into your crystal ball, what do you see for the future of sustainability?
Well, I guess in the spirit of food, I do find it to be like an egregious human error that we have so many people starving and so much food in landfills that's creating so many very, very dangerous greenhouse gases. I cannot, no matter how hard I try, wrap my head around why we have not, why there's people hungry and why we have so much food waste. Like those two things do not go together, and it just absolutely should not be that way. No one should be starving. No one should be starving, and we should not be heating up the planet with food that starving people who are hungry could be eating. Like it's just egregious to me. And so for me, the future of sustainability is that, everyone has nourishing, healthy food. And when you have that, then you can live up to the rest of your potential when you're not hungry and when you're not searching for food. And then we have farming systems that regenerate the planet as opposed to extract from it. And then those regenerative goods from the land are then feeding all of us, not just some of us. And we don't have all this food in the landfill. And somehow this is going to happen. And if I knew exactly how, I would probably be president, or maybe not. Maybe I would. Maybe that wouldn't be enough to be president. But if I knew, I would absolutely be doing it. But I think I'm excited about having that in the future for sustainability, and that it is one of the most critical ways that we can save ourselves and the planet. So That's what
Yay!
I don't know how, but
love
we're
it.
gonna do it.
We're gonna do it. We're all
Yeah.
we're all coming together. We're gonna work together, and we're gonna fix the world. Well, help me give a huge round of applause and thank you to Kayla for being here today and sharing her information. On behalf of Women in Sustainability, as a thank you, we will be planting 3 trees in your name through our partnership with One Tree Planted. So we will send that to you. They'll be planted in the National Forest. I hope everyone has a wonderful holiday. Please consider, making sure your food's donated or using it for, leftover recipes. I hope it's safe. I hope it's wonderful. Spend time with your families. Thank you for being here today. And we are excited to see you for more conversations in 2023. We'll be announcing our early events again soon. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful day. Have a wonderful holiday.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.